Hey guys, you're watching Diary of Betrayal. Things are about to get crazy. Are you ready to dive into shocking stories of cheating and betrayal? Let's go.
Michael enjoyed observing the world truthfully. He always told himself that silence was his greatest ally and modesty his shield. This was his strength. No one suspected that a true tycoon was concealed behind his gentle demeanor. He owned a network of upscale dining establishments, several hotels across the globe, and an investment firm known only to a select few. But to everyone else, he was simply Michael, the proprietor of a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. It was there that he encountered Olivia. She entered the cafe late in the evening, seeking refuge from a torrential downpour. Michael was, at that moment, reviewing the day's reports, seated at a distant table. The entire staff had already departed, leaving him alone in the quiet. The creak of the door made him look up, and the first thing he noticed was how raindrops trickled down the young woman's face. She was wiping her wet hair, shivering slightly, and appeared simultaneously lost and captivating. "Excuse me," she murmured, noticing his gaze. "Are you closed already?" Michael slowly rose and gestured towards a bar. "Closed, but we'll make an exception for you. Something hot?" "Yeah, coffee." She smiled hesitantly. "Tea would be wonderful. Thank you." A few minutes later, Michael was placing a cup of hot tea before her. He observed how her fingers wrapped around the mug, slender, graceful, slightly reddened from cold. He suddenly grew curious about who she was and what she was doing here at such a late hour. "Nasty weather, isn't it?" he began, sitting at an adjacent table. "Caught you off guard?" "Yes," she sighed. "I was visiting a friend, and on the way back, my car broke down. I had to walk, saw the light, and decided to come in. I hope I'm not disturbing you too much." "Not at all. I'm actually glad you came." A warm smile illuminated her face. She seemed simple and genuine, a type Michael hadn't encountered in his circles for a long time. All his business associates, employees, were meticulously composed, calculating, and sometimes even deceitful. Olivia, in contrast, appeared as pure as a blank sheet of paper, yet unmarked by any lines. "My name is Michael," he introduced himself. "Olivia," she replied. "Thank you for the tea." They started talking. Olivia shared that she worked as a kindergarten teacher, lived nearby, and often visited this cafe in the mornings on her day off. Michael listened, occasionally asking questions, and felt his interest in her growing. She was unlike the women he was accustomed to seeing. Olivia was simple, authentic. Her sincerity was captivating. When the rain subsided, she apologized and said it was time to leave. Michael walked her to the door and watched her disappear around the corner before returning to his reports. But work no longer flowed. Thoughts of Olivia stubbornly swirled in his head. The next day, he saw her again, this time in his cafe, having breakfast. She was sitting at a corner table, engrossed in a book. Michael was surprised to find himself waiting for a moment to speak with her, and that moment soon arrived. Olivia herself approached the counter to thank him for the previous evening. "You saved me then," she said with a smile. "I thought it would be right to have breakfast here to show my gratitude." "I hope you become a regular guest," he replied. "I'm prepared to personally ensure you're always comfortable here." And that was no joke. Michael genuinely began to find ways to be near her. He pretended he was just stopping by to check on the cafe's operations. But in reality, he was looking for Olivia. And every time she appeared, he felt a strange warmth ignite within him. Several weeks passed before Michael dared to ask her out on a date. Olivia blushed a little, but agreed. Their first date took place in a relaxed atmosphere. A walk in the park, conversations about everything under the sun. Michael felt as if he had broken free from the shackles of his usual world, where everything was governed by strict rules and calculations. With Olivia, he could be himself, but deep down, he knew he was hiding too much from her. Hiding his wealth, his connections, his influence. He feared that upon learning the truth, she would see him not as a person, but merely as another wealthy man accustomed to buying everything and everyone. And yet, he couldn't stop. Their relationship developed rapidly. After 6 months, Michael proposed, and Olivia, happy and unsuspecting, accepted. The wedding was modest but beautiful. Michael, despite his resources, insisted that everything be simple and cozy, like Olivia herself. Thus began their life together. But Michael could not have foreseen that the secret he decided to keep would become the first brick in the wall that would gradually begin to separate them. Olivia stood by the window of their spacious house, watching raindrops fall on the impeccably manicured lawn. The house was her pride. Michael had gifted it to her on their wedding day, and now every detail of the interior reflected taste, luxury, and his desire to see Olivia happy. Nevertheless, in all this time, she had never grown accustomed to this sudden, dizzying opulence. They had been married for 6 months. At first, everything seemed like a fairy tale. Michael showered her with gifts, arranged unexpected trips, and gave her flowers for no reason. He was attentive, gallant, and caring. She felt like the heroine of a novel, a girl from an ordinary family who had captured the heart of a mysterious and successful man. But with each passing month, cracks began to appear in their relationship. Michael often disappeared for work, spending weeks on business trips. He never elaborated on what exactly he did, limiting himself to brief phrases. "It's business, darling. It's better you don't get involved." Olivia tried not to ask too many questions, but the emptiness that grew between them gradually began to weigh her down. One evening, sitting on the plush sofa by the fireplace, Olivia decided to speak directly with Michael. "Mike," she began, trying to choose her words carefully. "You do realize I know almost nothing about your work, right? You always say everything is fine, but sometimes I feel like you're hiding something." Michael looked up from the tablet, where he was reading the news. His face remained calm, but something akin to irritation flickered in his eyes. "Olivia, I understand this might be important to you," he said softly, setting the tablet aside. "But my work is something that won't bring you joy. Believe me, I try to make you comfortable, and everything I do is for us." "For us?" she repeated, feeling a surge of irritation. "But it feels like US is diminishing. You're always away somewhere, and I just sit here and wait." He moved closer, sat beside her, and took her hand. "You are my wife. You gave me something I never had before. Peace. I take care of everything else. Don't think I'm putting you second." "That's not true." His voice was confident, almost hypnotic, but deep down, Olivia felt a chill. She didn't understand why he avoided honesty so much. The next day, Michael left for another business trip. Left alone in the enormous house, Olivia couldn't find her place. This prosperity irritated her. These endless shelves of expensive books she didn't even read, the marble bathtub where she increasingly soaked in hot water just to calm herself down somehow. At some point, she decided to distract herself and invited friends over. In their company, she felt alive, even if they often discussed trivial matters. That evening, a stranger appeared at the gathering. It was Andrew, a new boyfriend of one of her friends. "Nice to meet you, Olivia," he said, looking at her a little longer than necessary. His confident smile and a slight audacity in his demeanor intrigued her. Throughout the evening, Andrew barely left her side. His questions were personal but didn't cross boundaries. His compliments were direct but not vulgar. He listened attentively to her stories, as if her words were the most important thing to him. When everyone started to leave, Andrew lingered for a moment at the door. "You're not what I imagined a businessman's wife to be," he said. "And what did you imagine?" Olivia smirked. "Arrogant, cold. But you're completely different. It's nice." She said nothing, but his words stuck in her mind. After that meeting, Andrew began to message her periodically on social media. At first, just jokes, comments on photos. Then, the messages became longer and the questions deeper. Olivia initially responded cautiously, then found herself increasingly anticipating his messages, catching herself smiling as she read them. One evening, when Michael was away again, Andrew suggested they meet for a cup of coffee. Olivia agreed, assuring herself it was just a friendly meeting. They sat in a small cafe downtown. Andrew was witty, saying things she had longed to hear. "You're unhappy," he said suddenly. Olivia looked at him in surprise. "What makes you say that? It's obvious. You're too beautiful to be sad." These words sounded cliché, but they struck a chord. Olivia felt that Andrew saw something in her that, It seemed no one had noticed for a long time. When she returned home, guilt washed over her with renewed force. She understood that flirting with Andrew was a dangerous game, but a question echoed louder and louder in her soul. Does Michael truly value me? Does he love me as he once promised? Olivia didn't know where all this would lead, but she was already drawn into this abyss. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains in the living room, filling it with warm light. Olivia sat at the kitchen table, slowly stirring her tea with a spoon. Her phone lay in front of her, its screen regularly flashing with new messages. She knew it was Andrew, but didn't rush to reply. Several weeks had passed since their cafe meeting. Every evening, her thoughts returned to their conversation, to his words, to the way he looked at her. Andrew was someone she hadn't met in a long time. Free, confident, bold. He wasn't afraid to speak the truth and seemed to see right through Olivia. Since then, he had written to her every day. They talked about books, movies, about life. Andrew knew how to listen, asked unexpected questions, made her think. These were the conversations she had missed so much with Michael. The phone flashed again, pulling her from her reverie. Olivia picked it up. The message was short. "I want to see you." Her fingers froze over the keyboard. Her heart beat faster, and a battle raged within her between fear and the desire for something new. She took a deep breath and finally replied, "When?" 2 hours later, she was standing in front of the bedroom mirror, choosing a dress. Michael was on another business trip, and no one could stop her from leaving. Olivia justified her actions by telling herself it was just a meeting. She deserved a little freedom, a little attention. Was it a crime? Andrew was waiting for her in a small bar hidden from prying eyes. The place seemed to exist in a parallel reality. Dim lighting, jazz music, a faint scent of expensive tobacco. When Olivia entered, Andrew rose from his seat, smiling. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," he said, approaching her. "And I was afraid this was a bad idea," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. They sat in a corner at the far end of the room. Andrew ordered them wine, and the conversation began. At first, everything was surprisingly innocent. They talked about work, friends, even summer plans, but gradually the atmosphere changed. Andrew started asking questions that made Olivia feel uncomfortable, but she couldn't refuse to answer. "Why are you so unhappy?" he asked, looking intently into her eyes. "I'm not unhappy," she retorted, but her voice sounded unconvincing. "Then why are you here?" Olivia pondered. She couldn't find an answer. She was drawn to him, but couldn't explain why. She began, but Andrew interrupted her. "You deserve more. They hide you like a jewel in a safe, but you're alive, you're vibrant. Don't you want something real?" These whispered words seemed to break her final restraints. Olivia felt a warmth envelop her, and she wanted to believe him, to forget everything. When the evening ended, Andrew walked her to her car. They stopped on the sidewalk, and he leaned closer. "I won't rush you, Olivia, but know that I'm here." He leaned in and gently touched her cheek, not a kiss, but leaving a promise. Olivia felt her heart skip a beat. At home, she sat in the darkness, reflecting on what had happened. She was torn apart. Guilt towards Michael battled an irresistible attraction to Andrew. It was just a meeting, she told herself, but she knew it was only the beginning. The next day, Andrew wrote to her, "You haven't left my mind." Olivia wanted not to reply, but her fingers typed out a response on their own. "I'm thinking of you too." From that moment, everything started to spiral out of control. Their correspondence became increasingly explicit, their meetings more frequent. Andrew knew how to ignite a passion in her that she hadn't felt in a long time. A dizzying sense of freedom enveloped her, even if she understood it was an illusion. One evening, after a particularly tense phone call with Michael, Olivia didn't hesitate to dial Andrew's number. "I want to see you. Come over." This was her first betrayal, and she was aware of it. But standing on the threshold of Andrew's apartment, she could no longer stop herself. Michael returned from his latest business trip earlier than planned. His evening began with a business call. Partners reminded him that on this very day, a new restaurant was opening in the city center, another jewel in his business empire. This place was special to him, not just a restaurant, but a symbol of his taste and ambition. Michael decided to make this event a surprise for Olivia. It seemed to him that an evening together would be an excellent opportunity to refresh their relationship, which, as he was beginning to notice, was becoming increasingly strained. "You don't mind if we go out somewhere tonight?" he asked her at lunch. Olivia froze, fork in hand, surprised by Michael's proposal. She wasn't used to such spontaneous invitations. Usually, their days were planned in advance. Lately, Michael had seemed even more distant, and now this sudden attention unsettled her. "Of course, where to?" she smiled, hiding a slight unease. "You'll see," Michael replied mysteriously, his eyes sparkling with a particular gleam. Olivia spent the whole day preparing. She chose an elegant dress, applied light makeup, but despite all this, her soul was troubled. She knew Andrew was expecting her that evening. Their recent meetings had become too frequent, too dangerous. She had concocted an excuse for him, but guilt weighed her down. In the evening, Michael drove her to the restaurant. Her heart stopped when the car pulled up to the entrance. This place looked far too familiar. It was here that she had first met Andrew alone. Her palms began to sweat, but she pretended nothing was amiss. "Is this your restaurant?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "Yes," Michael replied, not noticing her agitation. "One of the new projects. I wanted to show you personally." When they entered, the room was already almost full. Guests were greeted by an exquisite interior, dim lighting, and music that created an atmosphere of coziness and mystery. Olivia felt panic rising within her. Every table seemed familiar. She was afraid of meeting someone here who knew about her encounters with Andrew. This way, Michael led her to one of the best tables, offering a view of the entire room. Olivia sat down, feeling as if she were on an electric chair. She tried not to look around, but her eyes instinctively searched for Andrew. He wasn't visible, and this calmed her slightly. "You seem a bit nervous," Michael observed, pouring wine into her glass. "No, it's just unexpected. You rarely arrange such evenings," she replied, forcing a smile. Michael looked at her intently, as if trying to understand what was going on in her head. But he remained silent, changing the subject to something neutral. Their dinner was uneventful until Olivia noticed a familiar figure. Andrew entered the room with a woman holding his arm. They looked like a couple, but Olivia knew it was just a cover. Her heart skipped a beat. She tried to distract herself, but her gaze kept darting towards Andrew. Andrew noticed her too. His gaze became sharp, but he showed nothing. Olivia felt the atmosphere growing tense. Michael, fortunately, noticed nothing. He was busy discussing future plans for the restaurant. But the tension reached its peak when Andrew left his companion at their table and approached the bar, which was near their table. He positioned himself so he would be in her line of sight and raised his glass, giving a barely perceptible nod in her direction. Olivia froze. Her heart was pounding so loudly that it seemed Michael could hear it. "Is everything all right?" Michael asked, noticing she had turned pale. "Yes, just the wine is a bit strong," she managed to say. Michael glanced at Andrew. He was looking directly at them with a faint smile that held a challenge. Michael frowned. "Do you know him?" he asked. His voice had become slightly colder. "No," Olivia quickly replied, averting her gaze. But Michael had already understood something. His mind, accustomed to noticing details and spotting weaknesses in people, instantly caught the change in Olivia's behavior. She avoided looking towards Andrew. Her hands nervously fiddled with the edge of her napkin. Michael put down his glass and looked at his wife attentively. "Olivia, are you hiding something?" he asked. His voice was almost a whisper, but that made it sound even more menacing. She froze, not knowing what to say. Any word could betray her. At that moment, a waiter approached their table with dessert. Michael leaned back in his chair, regaining his outward composure, but his gaze remained cold. Olivia knew he suspected something. The rest of the evening passed in tension. When they left the restaurant, Michael seemed quiet, almost serene, but Olivia sensed it was the calm before the storm. Andrew remained in the restaurant, watching them leave. His expression was full of irony, but also a hint of a threat. Back home, Michael was silent. Olivia tried to talk to him, but he evaded her answers, withdrawing into himself. She felt that he understood everything. Now she didn't know what was scarier, his silence or what would follow it. Michael sat in his study, illuminated only by a desk lamp. On the table stood a glass of whiskey, in which ice cubes lazily floated in the golden liquid. He swirled the glass in his hands, thoughtfully gazing at the play of light in the drink. 3 days had passed since the dinner at the restaurant, but his suspicions had only intensified. It was unpleasant for Michael to admit that his world, the world he had created, perfectly constructed, where everything was under control, could collapse due to betrayal. He had always known that people, even the closest ones, were capable of deceit. But Olivia, his Olivia, whom he had so carefully protected from any storms. This thought burned him from within. Michael was not accustomed to losing. For him, infidelity was not just a personal insult. It was an affront to his pride, his power. He made a decision to find out the whole truth and ensure the guilty paid. First, he hired a private investigator, a trusted man who knew how to work quietly and without unnecessary questions. Within 2 days, photographs and reports lay on his desk. They left no room for doubt. Olivia was meeting with Andrew. Their correspondence, their secret meetings, their intimacy, it was all documented. Michael looked at the pictures for a long time, then carefully placed them in a folder. He felt a mixture of rage and cold composure. Something inside him seemed to snap. He no longer felt pain, only a clear desire for revenge. The following night, Michael met with Paul, Olivia's brother. Paul was a sailor, a strong and reliable man, though a bit rough around the edges. He had always considered Michael an older brother and respected his firmness and success. "I have a request for you," Michael began, pouring them both a glass of vodka. "Not the most pleasant one, but very important. Tell me what you need," Paul replied, understanding the conversation was serious. Michael told him everything, not hiding the details. Paul's face first expressed bewilderment, then anger. "This Andrew, he knew she was married," he growled. "Yes," and he continued anyway. "I think he even found pleasure in it," Michael said, his voice even, but his gaze as cold as steel. "What do you want to do?" Paul asked, realizing Michael had already thought out a plan. "Punish him, but not kill him," he added after a pause. "I want him to understand who he messed with." Paul nodded. He was a simple man, without philosophical reflections on morality. For him, family honor and loyalty were sacred. He agreed to help without further questions. The next day, Michael observed Andrew. He was in his usual routine, visiting the gym, flirting with women, engaging in affairs that Michael considered trivial. He needed time to prepare everything. A week later, Paul, with 2 companions, sailors with a rugged appearance but quick hands, set up an ambush. Andrew, suspecting nothing, left a bar where he had spent the evening with a new girl. They were waiting for him on a dark street. "Hey, are you Andrew?" Paul's voice was cold, as if belonging to someone unaccustomed to hearing the word no. "What's it to you?" Andrew replied, trying to look confident, but his eyes betrayed fear. Michael, nearby in a car, watched everything through a slightly open window. He didn't intend to participate personally, but he needed to see his revenge carried out. The conversation didn't last long. Paul, using his physical superiority, quickly got down to business. Andrew found himself on the ground after the first blow. Paul's 2 companions did their jobs silently, professionally, causing pain but not killing. When it was over, Andrew lay on the cold asphalt, barely able to get up. Paul knelt beside him and said, "You were playing with fire, kid, but this is just the beginning." With these words, they left, leaving Andrew on the street. Michael watched as he struggled to his feet, leaning against a wall. His lips curled into a grimace in the shadow of the car. He felt a strange satisfaction. It was fair. The next day, Olivia sensed that something had changed. Michael began to behave differently, calm but distant. He no longer asked questions, didn't try to find out what was on her mind. This worried her most of all. A week later, she found out what had happened to Andrew. He called her himself, barely managing to hold the phone. They warned me. I can't anymore. This is the end, Olivia." "What happened?" "Who?" she asked, feeling everything inside her turn upside down. I don't know, but I think your husband knows, he uttered and hung up. Olivia sat in silence, feeling an icy fear slowly creep up her spine. She realized Michael knew, but what would he do to her now? Olivia sat in the kitchen, mechanically stirring coffee in her mug. Her hands trembled, and anxiety grew within her. Andrew's call forced her to face the truth. Michael knew. She could no longer deny the obvious. This explained his cold silence, strange glances, and distance. But what exactly he knew and what he intended to do remained a mystery to her. Her thoughts were chaotic. She tried to convince herself it was just a coincidence, that Michael was not involved in Andrew's beating. But an inner voice, which she had ignored for so long, whispered the truth. Michael was a man who didn't leave things unfinished. The day passed slowly, yet she felt time slipping away like sand through her fingers. She tried to act naturally, but every time Michael entered the room, her heart began to pound wildly. He said nothing, asked no questions, but his silence pressed down on her more heavily than any words. Michael knew how to torment a person without a single touch. He didn't create scenes, didn't throw accusations, but his gaze. Her soul seemed to burn under that gaze. Olivia knew he was waiting for her to speak first. Finally, towards evening, she couldn't bear it any longer. Michael was sitting in the living room, reading some business literature. His calmness looked terrifying. Olivia approached and stopped in the doorway. "Michael," she began, trying to catch his eye. He slowly looked up from a book, saying nothing. "We need to talk." He nodded, closing the book and placing it on a coffee table. "I'm listening," he said, crossing his arms over his chest. Olivia froze. She had expected him to pressure her, demand explanations, but his calmness disarmed her. She took a deep breath. "I know you've figured everything out. What exactly have I figured out?" His voice was icy, even almost indifferent. She lowered her gaze, unable to withstand his intense stare. "I made a mistake, a huge mistake, and I understand that you deserve the truth." Her voice trembled, but she continued. "There was something between Andrew and me." Michael slowly nodded, as if testing her words for truthfulness. "Was?" he asked, emphasizing the word as if it held key significance. "It's over," she added quickly. I don't know what came over me. I'm to blame, and You're to blame?" Michael interrupted, rising from his chair. His figure loomed over her, and Olivia felt fear envelop her. "Yes, I'm to blame," she repeated, struggling to force out the words. "And do you understand that I know more than you think?" Michael stepped closer. His voice remained quiet, but this made it seem even scarier. Olivia looked at him, trying to understand what he meant. "Do you think I just watched as you destroyed our marriage? That I sat idly by while you met him behind my back?" His eyes flashed with cold fury. "No, Olivia, I knew. I knew everything." She felt her legs give way. "What did you do?" Her voice was almost a whisper. "What I had to do. Andrew got what he deserved. And now you know it." Olivia covered her mouth with her hands, stifling a scream. Now everything fell into place. Andrew's call, his words, the fear in his voice. "You arranged this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Michael shrugged. He knew what he was getting into when he got involved with you. He decided to play with fire and got burned. Olivia felt panic seize her. She sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. "This is too much, Michael, this is too much." He leaned towards her. His voice was like the whisper of wind before a storm. "You betrayed me, Olivia. You destroyed what I built. Did you think it would remain without consequences?" Olivia burst into tears. She understood she couldn't blame Michael for what he had done, but her soul was torn between guilt for her betrayal and horror at what her husband was capable of. "I'll do anything to fix everything," she whispered through her tears. "Everything," Michael repeated, his eyes cold as a frozen lake. "Yes, everything," she repeated, looking him in the eyes. He nodded. "Then let's start with honesty. You will do what I say, lie by my rules, and maybe, someday, I can forgive you." He turned and left the room, leaving her alone. Olivia remained seated, feeling her heart break from pain and fear. She understood that her life would now change forever. 3 years passed. Time moved as if healing awound, but the scars remained. Michael lived as if nothing had happened. He launched new projects, expanded his restaurant chain, flew to meetings, and closed deals. His external life seemed flawless, but inside, a deep crack remained, a reminder that even the strongest armor can weaken. Olivia disappeared from his life after their last conversation. She moved to her mother's in another city, leaving everything behind: the luxurious house, friends, comfort. Her departure was quiet, without scandals, without goodbyes. She understood she could no longer be near a man who looked at her as if she were a stranger. Michael let her go. He didn't try to hold her back, didn't call, didn't inquire about her life. He believed that her punishment was not rage, but the cold emptiness he left behind. However, sometimes at night, in moments when work didn't fill his thoughts, Michael wondered what he felt. Was it a victory or, after all, a loss? On one such night, Michael sat in his study, absorbed in another report. His phone vibrated, pulling him from his concentration. Paul's name lit up on the screen. A call at this hour was unexpected. "Paul, did something happen?" Michael always valued his directness, but rarely received calls without reason. "Yes, there's something you should know." Paul's voice was serious, without its usual rough informality. "It's about Olivia." The name he hadn't heard in several years struck him like an avalanche. "What about her?" Michael forced himself to speak calmly, though everything inside tensed. "You have a son, Michael," Paul said, as if weighing each word. Silence hung on the line. Michael froze. "What did you say?" His voice became cold, sharp as a blade. "A son. He's 2 years old. Olivia wanted to tell you, but she was afraid you wouldn't want to listen. And I also thought it wasn't my place to interfere. But now you need to know." Michael felt the world around him begin to narrow. "A son." He had no idea how to react. His mind tried to process it. If the child was 2 years old, it happened shortly after their separation. Why had she hidden this from him? Why had Paul remained silent until now? Where is she now? Michael asked, interrupting his own thoughts. "With her mother, but they're in the city now, in a rented apartment. Do you want to meet?" "I have to meet," he replied, feeling anger and surprise mix into an inseparable knot. The next day, Michael arrived at the given address. It was a modest neighborhood that sharply contrasted with his usual luxury. A simple apartment building, a clean but humble courtyard. He went up to the floor, the sound of his own shoes echoing on the stairs. Olivia opened the door. She froze upon seeing him. Her face had changed. The carefree beauty that had once attracted him was gone. In its place was a woman who had endured too much. "Michael," she uttered, her voice hoarse and quiet. "Where is he?" he asked without preamble. Olivia stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The room was small, cozy, but completely unlike the palaces she had lived in before. A little boy with curly blonde hair sat on the floor, playing with a wooden truck. Michael stopped, his gaze fixed on the child, who suddenly looked up and stared directly at him. There was something of Michael in those eyes, the same cold, appraising look he saw in the mirror. "Is this him?" Michael turned to Olivia. "Yes, this is your son," she replied, lowering her eyes. He took a step forward, knelt beside the boy. The child looked at him with curiosity, but without fear. "What's your name?" Michael asked. "Ethan," the boy replied, smiling. The name was unexpected for Michael, but he quickly understood what it meant to Olivia. Ethan was her father, the man who had always supported her, even in the toughest times. Michael felt something change within him. Everything he thought about his life, about betrayal, about revenge, suddenly seemed petty and insignificant in the face of this small being. He turned to Olivia. "Why did you keep silent? Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was sharp, but it no longer held the ice that had frozen her before. "I was afraid," she answered, not looking up. "Afraid you would refuse, that you wouldn't want to see me or him." "He is my son, Olivia," he pronounced, feeling the word gain weight in his consciousness. She nodded silently, her eyes glistening with tears. "I won't forgive you for what you did," he continued. "But Ethan, he's not to blame for this." Michael stood up, looked at the boy again. "We'll talk," he added, looking at Olivia, "but that will be later. Olivia only nodded silently, understanding that her long path to redemption was just beginning. Michael went outside. Michael couldn't sleep that night. Meeting Ethan had overturned all his ideas about his own life. The boy, who was just beginning to discover the world, was not guilty of his mother's betrayal, nor of their broken marriage. He was a blank slate, to whom Michael felt a strange, inexplicable kinship. But what to do next? A life built on principles of control and retribution suddenly seemed incomplete. What could he offer Ethan? How could he fit a child into his world of harsh decisions and uncompromising rules? Olivia didn't sleep either. Her mind was gripped by fear and hope. Michael knew about their son, and although his reaction wasn't as destructive as she had feared, she knew many trials still lay ahead. She sat in the kitchen of her small apartment, staring at the blank phone screen, as if expecting Michael to call again suddenly. But no call followed. The next morning, Olivia decided to take the first step. She put on her best dress, not too expensive but neat, and got Ethan ready. "We're gonna see Daddy again today," she said, trying to smile. The boy beamed. He was too young to understand the vast chasm between his parents, but intuitively sensed that Michael was an important figure in his life. Michael waited for them at his restaurant. This was where their story had begun, and perhaps it was here that it was meant to find a new chapter. He had specifically chosen a private room to avoid unwanted attention. When Olivia entered, holding Ethan's hand, Michael stood up. He looked impeccable, as always, but his eyes betrayed tension. "Welcome," he uttered dryly, gesturing to the table. Olivia sat down, placing Ethan beside her. Michael remained silent, watching the boy examine the room with interest. "You wanted to talk?" Olivia broke the silence. Michael nodded. "Yes, we have many unresolved issues." He turned to Ethan. "Do you like chocolate ice cream?" "Yes," the boy responded. "Nah." Michael called a waiter and ordered dessert for his son. "Let's give him a little distraction." When Ethan focused on his ice cream, Michael turned to Olivia. "You had a child from me. You knew it was wrong, but you still decided I had no right to know." "Why?" Olivia tensed. I thought you wouldn't want anything to do with us. You were so cold, so distant." "Distant?" Michael repeated, restraining his irritation. "Olivia, I was like that because you betrayed me, not because I didn't care." She lowered her eyes, unable to find words. "All right, let's leave that in the past. What matters now is something else. What do you want?" His voice sounded firm, almost emotionless. Olivia looked up. "I want Ethan to know his father. I'm not asking you to forgive me or take me back." Her voice trembled, but she continued. "I'm asking you for his sake." Michael thought for a moment. "All right, he will know his father," he finally said. Olivia sighed in relief, but his next question made her tense up again. "But you? What will you do to prove you deserve this trust?" She froze, not knowing how to answer. I'm ready to do whatever it takes," she said finally. "Everything." Michael looked at her intently. "Yes." Michael leaned back in his chair, assessing her words. "Good. Then let's start with something simple. You'll move back to the city. Not with me, for now. But I want to see you change. I want to see that you're ready to rebuild your life for Ethan's sake and for your own." Olivia nodded. "I agree." He looked at the boy, who was happily finishing his ice cream. "We'll start small. I want to spend time with him. Once a week, lunch walks. And I want you to be there until he gets used to me." Olivia nodded again, feeling her heart calm down a bit. "All right, Michael. I'll do whatever you say." Thus began a new phase in their relationship. Olivia returned to the city, renting a modest apartment near one of Michael's restaurants. She found a job in a small shop, deciding she would no longer rely on anyone's generosity. Michael kept his word. He regularly met with Ethan, initially in Olivia's presence, and then began taking him for walks alone. The boy quickly grew attached to his father, and this became an unexpected source of joy for Michael. He saw Olivia trying, saw how her behavior was changing. She was no longer the frivolous woman he had once loved, but he still hadn't forgiven her infidelity.